They're free to ask any question you have by writing it in the chat box. We will be happy to answer it during the webinar, and Ahmed will go through the chat once he's done with the webinar and collect all questions and answer them accordingly. The webinar will be recorded, and the recording will be shared with all of you after the webinar. That's all from my side. Over to you, Ahmed.
Thank you, Hadia. Thank you for your introduction. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm very excited to be here with all of you today. And I would like to welcome you all to this webinar about a day in the life of a solutions architect. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to attend the webinar, and I hope you will find it equally useful and enjoyable. I would like also to take the opportunity to thank Hadia and the Qureos team for organizing these webinars and for having me today. Please allow me to start with a few words about myself. My name is Ahmed Ibrahim. I'm an Egyptian engineer working and living in Saudi Arabia. I'm currently working as a senior solutions architect with Amazon Web Services, AWS. I have a little bit more than 18 years of experience since my graduation, and I hold a bachelor and a Master of Science degrees in electronics and communication engineering. I have always been passionate about solutions architecture and how it solves real-world problems. And I have worked in this role for the past 11 years, and that's why I selected this topic to talk to you today about. Before AWS, I worked for a long time for Ericsson, the giant Swedish telecommunications equipment vendor. I also worked for STC Solutions, the system integrator arm of STC Group. And directly after my graduation, I worked for Raya Telecom, an internet service provider that was acquired later on by Vodafone. I enjoy working in customer-facing roles. My customers, as Hadia mentioned, include communication service providers, as well as large enterprises across different industries, especially in retail and manufacturing. On the personal side, I'm a father for 3 kids, 2 boys and a girl. Outside work, I love to spend my time with my family. I also love reading, especially in non-work related topics like literature, history, and economics. And when it comes to sports, my favorites are football or soccer, to be specific, and tennis. And that's enough about myself, and let's move forward. So what are you going to learn today? Today, I will talk to you about a day in the life of a solutions architect. And before I dive deep into the particular things that keep a solutions architect busy during a working day, I would like to start with some fundamentals. For example, what is solutions architecture? Why is this role important for organizations? What are the other types of IT architects over there? Then we are going to look into how solutions architects spend their time and how they engage with their customers to help them solve their business problems. And finally, I will talk to you about how you can start your career as a solutions architect and some of the things that you can do after having enough architectures in your life. So without any further ado, let's jump in and get started. Let's start by the definition of solutions architecture. There are many formal definitions on the internet for solutions architecture. And honestly speaking, I learned about some of them for the first time when I started preparing for this webinar. For example, if you go to Wikipedia, you will find definitions from organizations such as the Open Group, Gartner, and many others. Based on my experience, I like to define solutions architecture as a function that utilizes building blocks, such as standalone technologies, to build or construct a meaningful solution to address a certain business problem and solve it by following best practices. So let's assume you are launching a business in any meaningful business vertical. It could be, for example, telecommunications or healthcare, education, e-commerce, food and beverages, media and entertainment, travel and logistics, you name it. And you want to build a platform where you can offer your products and services to your customers and at the same time differentiate yourself. And here comes the role of solutions architecture. It assembles the right set of technologies in a fashion that fulfills your requirements. And not only doing that, it makes sure that your platform is secure against any bad actors, resilient against any failures, performant in the way your customers expect it to perform, sustainable and causes the least possible harm to the environment, and of course, cost optimized to make sure you run an economically viable business. What I like the most about solutions architecture is that there is no single answer to a business problem. If you put 10 solutions architects in a room and give them the same business problem, it's not unlikely that you'll get 10 different solutions. And I'm going to elaborate more on this in the next slide. There are always common best practices that everyone is encouraged to follow. For example, never compromise on security. Do not allow broad and unnecessary access to your applications just because you don't want to invest the right time and effort on security. It's worth mentioning here that there is always a right way of doing things, and there is an easy way of doing things. Let's look at this example on the left-hand side of the screen. You can see someone risking their lives by inserting a key in the power socket to make it possible to insert a 2-pin power plug into a 3-pin socket. And this is definitely not a good idea. We refer to this behavior in solutions architecture as anti-pattern. On the other hand, by getting the right adapter, you can use it to convert a 2-pin plug into the desired 3-pin plug before safely inserting it into the socket. And this is what we refer to as pattern. That being said, I still think of solutions architecture as an art more than a science. There is always going to be more than one option that will help you achieve your desired outcomes. So let's go back to the previous example of the 10 architects in the room. If you ask them to build a website, for example, someone will decide to manage the full technology stack themselves, starting from the infrastructure up to the application layer. Another one will consider using a managed infrastructure, let's say from a service provider, to offload any related burden and focus more on the website itself. A third one will go as simple as just hosting the website files in an online object store that offers a website endpoint. So as you can see here, with solutions architecture, there is less of right or wrong solution design and more of good or bad solution design based on what you want to achieve. And in all cases, and as you can see on the right-hand side of the screen, there will always be a trade-off. Now let's talk about the types of IT architects. And before we start, I have to admit that the use of the term architect in the IT domain can sometimes be confusing, especially for someone who's not working in the IT field or someone who hears it for the first time. And the reason is that the term architect is originally used in the construction field. So you say, for example, a landscape architect or a residential architect or a commercial architect. However, more recent, it was adopted in the IT domain, and it's now used as a standard term in the industry to refer to the role we are talking about today, an IT builder who utilizes different technologies to solve business problems. Solutions architect is one type of IT architects. However, it's not the only type. There are several other types of architects within the IT domain. For example, and as you can see here on the screen, network architects, enterprise architects, software architects, and so on. They are even grouped based on their orientation, whether they are operations-oriented or business-oriented or vendor-oriented, and so on. And this has been addressed quite nicely in this figure, which is captured from a recent article by Red Hat, published around a year ago. I don't plan in this webinar honestly to go into details about the difference between them. However, I really encourage you to read the full article, and I have included the link to it. What is important maybe to highlight here is that from this point onwards in my presentation, I'm going to refer to the vendor-oriented solutions architect. And despite the fact that I worked for specific vendors, I tried to keep this presentation as much as possible vendor-oriented, vendor neutral. Vendor-oriented is completely something else, vendor neutral. Okay, so why is solutions architect role important? First of all, a solutions architect is a customer-facing role. And when I say customer here, I mean an external customer, because customers can be internal or external. And to understand the difference between them, let me explain to you the chain that you see on the screen. In any business, you'll find business users, and those are the teams that take care of the business and deliver value to their end users. Let me give you an example. In a bank, the business users are teams such as community banking that takes care of teller services, branch operations, new accounts, and so on. There could be other teams such as wealth management, commercial lending. These are all examples of business users. And if this bank or this business in general is leveraging technology, which is almost what every business is doing, then you'll find some technical teams within the organization that take care of the technology part. For example, installing and maintaining the business management software, connecting the business branches together, and securing all these systems against any cyber threats or attacks. So business users are internal customers to the technical teams. They do lie within the same organization boundaries, but they consume the services provided by them. On the other hand, external customers are businesses that are willing to pay you to get your technology and or expertise. So let's go back to the solutions architects. Solutions architects are at the forefront of the vendor's organization, and they interact directly with their external customers, the technical teams we just talked about. And honestly speaking, this is the most exciting part about the role. I know I might sound a little bit biased here. I mean, dealing with internal customers is fantastic, but trust me, working with external customers is something else. One last point to mention. I know I spent much time on this slide, but it's really important. No one can do everything alone. So solutions architects are supported by several other departments within the vendor's organization, such as industry-focused or technology-focused groups, product teams who own the roadmaps of the products the vendor is offering, and many others. Okay, another interesting slide. What is this figure trying to tell us? On the horizontal axis, you can read influence and whether the role has or doesn't have an influence. And on the vertical axis, you can read formal authority, and again, whether the role has or doesn't have a formal authority. And then you will find some cool names given for each quadrant. I love these names. I captured them from a business training that I attended with one of my previous employers. So with formal authority and with influence, you will be a visible leader in your organization. That's pretty straightforward. With no formal authority and no influence, you are a worker. And frankly speaking, there is nothing wrong about that. We have all been there one day or another. Maybe you're just early in your career. What's tricky is to remain there for a long time. And then comes the third quadrant, formal authority and lack of influence. And that's something you should avoid. The name is terrible, empty suits. You don't want to possess an authority and have no positive impact on your teams or your surroundings. And finally, my favorite quadrant, influence with no formal authority. And this is where all the magic happens. Some people refer to the roles in this quadrant as foxes. And the reason is that they can drive their organizations and steer the directions of their customers' decisions without having any formal authority. They do this just by understanding the trade-offs and how to leverage the lessons learned from past experiences, which is also known as best practices. And by the way, it's not only limited to solutions architects, it's equally applicable to any other role that has an influence with no formal authority. So now let's move to the core part of the presentation. How solutions architects spend their time. Before I jump in, I would like to say that the percentages you see on the screen are not strictly fixed. They are just indicative. They will typically differ from one architect to another, from maybe one day to another. However, in all cases, the biggest portion of a solutions architect time will always be spent with their customers. And honestly speaking, I can't think of a more important task that solutions architects can do than spending their time with their customers. It doesn't matter which vendor you work for, it's just part of the role's requirements. The second half of your time as an architect will be split between few other activities. And that represents your commitment towards yourself through learning and experimenting, your commitment towards the company you work for through the housekeeping part, and finally, your commitment towards the community at large through thought leadership. In the next few slides, I'm going to talk about each of these activities in a little bit more details. So let's start with the customer engagements. This is arguably the most important slide in my presentation today. Sometimes it's misunderstood that solutions architect is just a technical role and has nothing to do with the business. And let me tell you something. Companies are not interested in technology for the sake of technology. They want to solve their business problems. As a technical person, I could be fond of technology, of a certain technology, but a company's CEO will always see technology as an enabler, a problem solver, a mechanism to get things done. And by the way, they are not attached by any means to complex technologies. In fact, it's completely the opposite. The simpler the solution for their problem, the more favorable it is for them. So how do solutions architects solve business problems? First and foremost, the conversation will start with business requirements. So for any architecture that you see the next time, remember that there is a business problem that this architecture is trying to solve. And when I say a problem, it doesn't have to be something that is not functioning or working properly. It can be a security issue that you are trying to solve, a reliability you are trying to improve, maybe a customer experience you are trying to enhance, or it could be a cost you are trying to optimize, literally anything that the business demands. In the second step, business requirements will be translated into technical specifications. And who will do that? In many cases, this is going to be a joint activity between vendors, solutions architects, and the customer's technical teams. And once steps 1 and 2 are settled, then architects will have enough information to build the target architecture and determine the quantities needed of each component. Honestly, the whole process is better explained through an example, and this is what I'm going to do next. Step number 1, let's assume a customer X comes up with the following requirement. I want to make sure I will not lose my data in case of a disaster in my data location. And let me tell you, this is a typical business requirement that I personally get from my customers every day. Data is one of the most valuable assets that business is on today. So obviously, everyone wants to make sure that it will survive disasters. Of course, you can still make duplicates of your data within the same location, but how am I going to react as a business owner to protect my data in the unlikely event of a natural disaster like an earthquake or flood? This is a problem definition. And we as technical teams in general and solutions architects in specific need to find a solution. Step number 2, translate the business requirements into technical requirements. In this example, that would be build an offsite backup solution. Choose a distant location outside the blast radius of any possible disaster and keep an updated copy of your data there. This step is very important, although it might look simple. The reason is that the majority of clarifications are expected to take place in this step. So as a solutions architect, I will start immediately asking questions such as, what is the amount of data you'd like to protect? Do you have any restrictions in storing your data outside a certain geography? What is the bandwidth available for transferring your data over the internet? And with every answer I get, I started to narrow down the options. Every answer will help me to either include a possibility or eliminate a possibility, include a building block or exclude a building block. And that makes me happy, of course. It's also worth mentioning that one of the things I learned as a solutions architect over the time is how to feel comfortable in uncomfortable situations. And the reason I'm mentioning that is throughout this process, you will have to deal with certain degree of ambiguity or uncertainty. It's really unlikely that you will get answers to all the questions that you have. And at some point in time, you'll just have to make assumptions, reasonable assumptions, share it with your customer, and just move forward. Finally, in step number 3, the technical specifications are expected to be as clear as possible. You can start picking the right components from your products portfolio, or even from third-party products if needed, assemble them together, and calculate the quantity needed of each item. In this example, a typical solution will include a backup software with a properly sized storage volume, a gateway element that will secure the data in transit, and a standby location that will satisfy any latency requirements that the customer may have. But at the same time, will not share the same fate with the main data location. So although that was a simple example, but the same process equally applies to more recent and complex technologies, such as machine learning, Internet of Things, data analytics, and so on. Now let's move to the second activity that solutions architects spend their time on, and that is thought leadership. I still remember the first time I heard the term thought leadership in one of my previous employers, and how I thought it was only relevant to the leadership team of the organization, maybe because it has the word leadership in it. And this is simply not true. Thought leadership is relevant to everyone who wants to have an influence, with or without having formal authority. So how can you practice thought leadership as a solutions architect? There are many different meaningful ways. You can start by writing an article or a blog post, and you can literally write on a variety of topics. For example, you can talk about a new product or feature, a comparison of different solutions or deployment models, or simply share your views and experiences. I have read this morning an interesting article by one of the solutions architects in my network on how to select the best firewall stack option to secure your internet-facing applications deployed in the cloud. When it comes to the media where you will publish your content, you can use a variety of options. This can be a public channel or your company's blog page, or even your own blog page if you have created one. You can write alone or you can collaborate together with other specialists as well. Another form of thought leadership would be speaking in public events. I personally enjoy using applications such as Meetup or Eventbrite. They are just fantastic platforms that give you the opportunity to meet like-minded people and share your experiences. One thing I would like to mention before I leave this slide is that thought leadership might not come intuitively. In fact, you as a solutions architect need to train your writing and speaking muscles a lot. And like everything else that requires practice, there will be a learning curve before an architect can deliver their content or publish their work. They may need to go through a peer review or a mentorship process as well. The second to last activity, and my favorite one, is learning and experimenting. And I bet a lot of solutions architects would agree with me. I believe that at least quarter of the working time of an architect should be spent on learning and developing their skills, especially in a fast-changing domain such as IT. This is actually what fuels the previous two activities that we talked about, customer engagements and thought leadership. You may argue that this is a big chunk of an individual's time budget, but trust me, good companies know the importance of it. And learning comes in a variety of forms as well. As you can see here on the screen, you need to learn the theory, you need to have some hands-on practice, and preferably get a certification that will validate your skills. And finally, housekeeping. Probably this is one of the least interesting activities for a solutions architect. You'll typically receive a lot of reminders from your manager to either plan for it or complete it. And this includes activities such as business reporting, so how you spend your time, with which customer, on which engagement, in which geography, and so on. Business reviews, and this usually happen on a quarterly basis. And this is where you discuss what you achieved as individuals or as a team compared to the targets. And then business planning, which will typically happen at the beginning of the year, and everyone will get their own goals and KPIs. Performance reviews of individuals and team activities are also considered as part of the internal affairs of a company. What is important to mention here, however, is although almost no one likes to be involved in housekeeping activities, but they are essential to keep the family going and the business going as well. And that's simply because it gives the organization's leaders the visibility to make informed decisions for the future of the company. And that was the last piece of a solutions architect diary. What I'm left with is the career of a solutions architect. And these are going to be my last two slides for our webinar today. At some point in time in my career as an architect, I was wondering if this job can suit an early career individual, or is it necessary to start your career with something else, gain some experience, and then move to an architect role? I have also been curious about what next steps my fellow architects will take after architecting enough solutions. And again, what I'm going to share with you is my own personal view based on my experience and observation in the field for the past decade. There are several paths that can lead you to a solutions architect role. I have mentioned here some of them in orange. First, yes, you can start your career with architecting. However, your employer will most probably have to put you in a special program for sufficient amount of time, around 6 to 12 months, to teach you enough about the technologies that you are going to deal with in your day-to-day job. Alternatively, and this is somehow closer to my heart, you can choose to do something else before landing into an architect role. And this will honestly give you an edge in one area or another. For example, I have worked with many architects coming from different backgrounds, such as software development, system administration, professional services, technical training, and everyone has their own superpowers, which can definitely be used in certain conversations with the customers. What is truly interesting and inspiring at the same time are people who decide to shift their career completely from something else to IT. And I know few cases personally, and they are just doing great. Some of them have changed their careers from as extreme as medicine to IT. Now, let's talk about the next steps after you are done working as a solutions architect. And I was rehearsing these slides with my wife when she told me that I just can't talk about it while I'm still working in this job. So I have to admit that what I'm sharing with you on the right-hand side of the screen right now is based on my observations rather than something I experienced myself. Maybe with the exception of the first box, stay as long as you want, but other architects will decide to move vertically in leadership positions or horizontally in sales or project management roles. And few of them will just build their own empires. Whatever you plan to do in the future, I'm confident that Solutions Architect will give you a very useful toolkit that will help you to succeed. I'd like to thank you very much for your time attending this webinar. I hope you have found it useful in one way or another, and I wish you all the success in your career. Hadia, back to you.
Thank you so much, Ahmed, for sharing your insights. For somebody who has no clue about what solutions architecture is, this was very helpful, and I've been able to gather really good insights. So thank you so much for sharing it in such a way.
Absolutely, with pleasure. Thank you.
Great. So we've got a couple of questions in the chat. The first one is by Ravi. Ravi Kumar says, what is the difference between pre-sales engineer and solutions architect?
Wow, this is a very good question. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of companies are still using the terminology pre-sales engineer, right? And I've worked with some of my previous employers where they use this terminology a lot, right? However, what I have seen is that maybe with somehow the modern companies are especially working in the public cloud domain, are using more solutions architects. Solutions architects are builders and are trusted advisors for the customer. So they are not trying to sell anything to the customer. They should put themselves in the customer shoes and try to advise to look into the customer best interest. So pre-sales sometimes give the impression that you are trying to sell something to the customer. And as I said, maybe recently, and this is what we are going to see more in the future, that people or companies are trying to deviate somehow from using the term pre-sales into the solutions architect. And however, I mean, the job nature or as a role nature, both of them can be doing exactly the same thing. But it's just a matter of preference from company's perspective. And thank you for the question.
Great, that's awesome. You mentioned about how pre-sales engineers are regularly, and even solutions architects are regularly liaising with the clients. So I just want to ask, how do you break down the technical jargon to the clients so they understand better?
Yeah, I mean, this this probably requires a lot of discussion, but I think there will typically, yeah, I think I hear somehow an echo. Yeah, thank you. So I mean, this is kind of a process rather than a single activity, and it depends honestly on the industry that you work for. So in some industries, you will have a fewer number of customers, and you will have long-term engagements, and the lifetime the lifetime of the engagements are quite long. In other, like maybe in the telecommunications industries. However, in other industries like retail or manufacturing, or supply chain, or many other industries, you will have larger number of companies, and you will have short-term engagements. So it depends on the industry. Every industry, I would say, has a different approach and a different technique to deal with. But some of them will just use the RFX process, like the RFP or RFI process, that will take sometimes quite a long time. Other will just like, I mean, with the public cloud providers, for example, there will typically be no such long processes. It's just anyone with a credit card can start building and architecting on the cloud. So it's typically a shorter, I would say, a shorter customer engagement, advising the customer on very specific technical details. So it depends on the industry. Each one will have different approach, and I'm happy to take it further because it requires maybe a lot of discussion, and I'm happy to take it further after the webinar with whoever asked the question.
Okay, great. That's amazing. I am going to include another question. The question is by Sarah Salam. Sarah says, what is the degree of details of a solutions architect solution, and who will take the solution and detail it more so that eventually developers will work on it, for instance? In other words, the output of the solution is whose input?
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Sarah, for the question. Nice, great talking to you again after so long time. And I think the solutions architect is part of the technical team, right? They are not the only people working in the technical field. So typically they are concerned with the architecture level, right? And but the project implementation is not a typical part of a solutions architect role, or troubleshooting and maybe support tickets are as well not a typical part of the day-to-day work of a solutions architect. So once there is an architecture in place and is agreed upon with the customer, then typically this will go to probably first a proof of concept, so kind of a small scale implementation that is kind of a safe environment to test and fine tune, and this is done by, it can be a professional services team within the vendor's organization itself. It can be a system integrator or a partner to the vendor who will take this role. And then after the proof of concept, then we will have the project implementation, where we will have the full execution of the project, which can be implemented in a single phase or multi-phase as well. And this will be typically done by professional services team, as I mentioned, in any of these organizations. So the vendor, a system integrator, a partner, maybe sometimes by the customers or the business themselves. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Ahmed, for such a detailed answer. Among the questions that we're receiving in the chat, we're also receiving a lot of praise for yourself. Everyone is saying that the webinar has been very simple and straightforward, and they've had a lot of things to take away from. I'm going to include a question from Yusuf. Yusuf says that you explained that there are many ways to transition to a solution architect role. For me, I come from a technical background, but now working as technical delivery manager. What are the required steps? Bit details will help to move to an SA role.
Okay, well, that's another great question. Yeah, I think, look, I will share my own personal experience I would say from practical experience as well, and allow me to be honest here. So first of all, I see more chances for technical people who are working in customer-facing roles to move to a solutions architect role. So I have seen maybe it's more easier if you are dealing with external customers in any other technical role to move to a solutions architect role, right? Because the company expects that you'll spend a lot of your time with the customers, and you have to be able to manage this in an efficient way. And then this is the first point, right? The second point is depends on the requirements of the company you're applying for. So some companies will, and especially with smaller organization, will focus on specific skill set. So you should understand technically a certain set of technologies to be able to work with these small organizations. For larger organizations, they will focus equally on technical and non-technical skills of the candidates, because they do have big teams, and you are going to work with a big team, so you will have a full organization supporting you. They just want to make sure that you have the skills, the non-technical skills required for the job, and for the technical skills, of course, you should have at least a good understanding of what they are looking for. But later on, they will train you for whatever technologies they want you to deal with. And finally, referrals also is very important. So if you have connections in the companies you want to work for, try to look for referrals. Referrals always work very good. I have worked in 4 companies since my graduation, and I recall that the 4 of them, I joined them based on referrals from someone. On the other hand, maybe I applied for hundreds of other jobs and there was no luck. So yeah, just to give you the full experience of myself.
Yeah, that's a very elaborate response. Thank you for that, Ahmed. I would include another question that is by Rami. He's saying, at which technical level should the architect be, high or low level?
Look, okay, architect will have to manage the technical aspects and the business aspects, right? So from practical perspective, you will not always have enough time to dive deep into all the details, right? So you have to be smart here. You have to play it smart. You have to choose which engagement you want really to dive deep in it, and which engagement you will not do that, and you will just maybe rely on your extended team, maybe rely on a system integrator or professional services team to support you with this with your tasks. So I think it depends on the situation, okay, and maybe the urgency and the importance quadrants as well. So things that are urgent and important, you have to do it immediately. Other things you have to plan for it. But in general, that's why I think working in a role different than the solutions architect for some time will help you to speed things up when you move to the solutions architect. So let's say you came from software development background. Then when you have an engagement with a customer and you are dealing with the developers team of the customers, then you don't need to pause what you are doing and go learn about software development and then go and talk to them, right? You're just leveraging your previous experience. Or if you came maybe from system administration or database administration, and you talk to the customers, system administrators or database administrator, you would do the same, right? So this is how the company will position the architects with special backgrounds in special customer engagements and conversations. But again, I'm sorry, this is a long answer to a short question, but again, it's case by case. You have to select your engagements carefully because you have a limited time budget, so you have to play it wisely. Some engagements you selected to dive deep, other engagements you just decide to stay on the surface.
Great, great insights shared in this answer as well. The next question that I'm going to share is something that I also was thinking about. So Ravi is asking that if you could highlight any prevalent industry certifications that a solutions architect can do for himself.
Yeah, I mean, okay. Yeah, so, I mean, look, honestly speaking, I'm asking others the same question, right? And I mean, so it depends. I think maybe it's obvious to many of us that there are some industry certificates and some vendor certificates, right? So during the very first years of my after my graduation, Cisco certificates and Microsoft certificates, where everyone was just interested, in CCIE and Microsoft certificates. I'm sorry, I forgot the name. And I think now, as we speak, and as things have progressed, I believe that now a lot of companies, a lot of IT companies are considering moving their applications more to the cloud. So I would say that cloud certificates from whatever vendor of your selection, it could be AWS, it could be Google Cloud, it could be Microsoft Azure, it could be IBM, Oracle, Ali Cloud, whatever cloud, whatever inspires you and you think it's right, you can just go for it. Security certificates and security domain will always be of high priority. And I have a personal interest as well in blockchain certificates. This is kind of, I would say, a personal passion for myself. So, I mean, it's not required for my job, but I like really to read a lot about cryptography, blockchain, and cryptocurrency. So it's a mix between, what you want to do and what inspires you and what is your passion.
Okay, that's great. That's a very detailed answer. I also wanted to sort of discuss since a lot of the participants that have joined in are either fresh graduates or they're about to graduate. So what sort of things should they incorporate in their thought process from now on if they want to build a career in solutions architecture?
Yeah, I mean, it's building a career in solutions architecture. I think it's a journey. Now I think finding the right training and the right maybe mentorship programs is much easier than before, right? And now you can see a lot of companies that are offering their trainings for free, especially maybe starting from the pandemic time up until now. You'll find many different companies that are offering free trainings in core technologies as well as in modern and recent technologies, right? So they are not only talking about maybe compute, storage, networking, security. They are also offering training programs for free for in machine learning, in artificial intelligence, or data analytics, and many Internet of Things and many other domains. So try to leverage these trainings. They are very well structured. Sorry, I don't have this in mind right now, but I'm aware that a lot of companies are doing this. I can maybe prepare and share a list with the audience after the webinar. But this is, I suggest that this is a very good starting point. And then the blog posts, you can find, a lot of free blog posts and articles, and even deployment guides, right? So all what you need is to create an account in any one of the public cloud providers, and then start building and start trying yourself. And that's it. It's so simple. Maybe 10 years ago, I had to purchase metals like servers at my home, racks, networking, and you don't need to do this at all. You just need, only what you need is your credit card. Just put a limit for that, and then start architecting on the cloud.
Great. Since our time is almost coming to an end, I'm just going to ask you for one last thing, Emmett. I
Sure.
would like to know if there's an issue that came to you or like a request that came from your clients and how basically you approached it and how you sort of delivered a solution for that. We'd really like to know from a like real life example that you've conducted.
Yeah, this sounds like an interview question, Hadia, but I'm not prepared for any interviews today. But it's yeah. But I mean, this is a typical situation. You're asking about the problem from a customer seeking solution.
Anything that you've done on the job, so our participants have like a clearer idea how it seems to be when you're a solutions architect.
Yeah, I mean, it's our everyday story. So my colleagues and myself, and yeah, I think one of the recent examples maybe is I was working with one of the large customers in the event planning domain, and this is typically, I mean, they have a platform. They are announcing and advertising a lot of events. They are selling tickets, and it's really very critical business, right? It's maybe if you have an experience booking tickets with FIFA World Cup, then you'll understand that there is a lot of pressure from the people trying to book the tickets at a very narrow window or time slot, right? And this is really very tricky. It requires a lot of preparation. So, I mean, it's the actions or the activities I'm doing with my team and with my customers to prepare for such events. It's not like a one-time activity that we do and that's it. We start early preparation, maybe 2 or 3 days in advance. Of course, automation plays a big role, but still preparation and make sure that infrastructure is ready, doing a lot of regression and stress testing, and I mean, making sure that disaster recovery is working fine, and do some failure scenarios and recovery scenarios practically. So it's I would say it's a process that we have to go through it. There is no single action. Of course, monitoring and working closely with the support organization during the events itself, or the time where there will be high traffic on their platform or their websites. So this is just one example of how we as a team. It's not only the solutions architects, right? Architects are working as part of a larger team of support engineers, of operations team, and so on. So it's this is how the process works for us.
Great. Emma, thank you so much for being a part of this webinar. Our participants are all praises for you. If you have a look at the chat section, everyone's thanking you for conducting a great webinar. And even you've made sure that in the most difficult of concepts have been sort of demarcated in the understanding of a layman, and we're really thankful to you for that. And I'd also like to thank the participants who've joined in today, and we really are glad that you had a great time at the webinar today. We'd be conducting more webinars, and we would be seeing more of Ahmed on our platform. So stay tuned there. You have a lot of webinars, and thank you so much, Ravi. Ravi's thanking you again, Ahmed. And yeah, so
Thank you.
we have a lot of webinars and cohorts coming up, and you're free to browse and be a part of that. And just accelerate your learning journey. Thank you so much, Ahmed, for being a part of this. I think we
Thank
have
you.
more questions. We just have praise now for you. So yeah,
Thank you, Hadia. Thank you so much for organizing this webinar, and thank you for all the audience and participants. It has been a pleasure being here today. I hope this has been beneficial for you. Please feel free to get in touch with me later on. I had honestly a very good set of questions. I know some answers I have provided might be somehow generic. I'm willing to go into more detailed discussions later on, and I learned myself, honestly. It's a very good learning opportunity for me as well. Thank you for that.
Thank you so much, Ahmed. Thank you very much. I just, before we part, I just want to share with the participants that this webinar has been recorded and we will be sharing the recording with all of you. So thank you so much for being a part of this. Thank you, Ahmed. Have a great day, all of you.
Thank you. Bye.